So this became like, okay, my goal has to be that I have to go into IIT and actually have to study computer science. And so for that, I had to basically reverse engineer what I have to do to achieve that, right?
Okay, yeah. At that time I was in a small town called Salem. So the only thing that is famous for is a steel plant over there. There weren't any coaching centers for IIT.
In my town, I guess before me, the one person who went to IIT was like maybe 6 years before.
Even though I was from a small town and there's not that much kind of awareness or like coaching opportunities within that town, I had the other big advantage that my brother had gone through the same process, and so I kind of knew what to expect.
Once the exams were over and we got into IIT, I think the biggest lesson was learning how to work with peers, right? Was as smarter than you.
So one thing I realized was, if you are in the rat race, you tend to lose your work-life balance, and you are essentially saving up for the last 10-20 years of your life where you don't have the energy to do what you want to do.
Welcome to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast, where we talk to computer scientists who immigrated from their home countries for study or for work or for other reasons. In these oral history interviews, you will find established and renowned computer scientists from across academia and industry narrating their experiences of immigrating from where they grew up to a completely different land, often the US. My name is Indy Gupta, and I'm your host. Welcome to the premiere episode of Season 2 of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. These first 3 episodes of this new season, starting with this one, cover the nation of India. India is the second most populous nation in the world. It's also currently one of the largest sources of immigrants to the US in the information technology and computer science sectors. An episode like today's episode has never been done before. 7 technologists all gathered together. All of them studied in the same major from the same university in India during the same 4 years back in the 1990s. And our discussion covers a range of topics, beginning from our individual immigrant journeys to everyone's perspectives on the IITs, on India, on technology, and on life as Indian immigrants in the US. Now, India is a large country, as I said before, and no single episode can do it justice. Yet, within India, one of the most premier universities for engineering is the IITs, or Indian Institutes of Technology. The first IITs were created by the Indian government in and around 1951, a few years after the nation achieved its independence from Great Britain. The IITs have always intended to be, and have always been, the premier place to study all engineering disciplines in India. First came IIT Kharagpur in the eastern part of India. Soon, by the late 1950s, 4 more IITs had been added in Bombay or Mumbai to the west, Kanpur to the north, Madras or Chennai to the south, and Delhi to the north. Until 1994, these were the 5 IITs spread all across the country. The demand for the IITs was so high that the Indian government started expanding them after 1995. Today, there are 23 IIT locations, give or take a few. Anyway, for this episode, we rewind back to 1994 when there were only 5 IITs. Now, entering the IITs is really, really hard. One has to write a national entrance exam called the IIT JEE or IIT Joint Entrance Exam for the Indian Institutes of Technology. This exam covers a variety of subjects including physics, chemistry, and math. The total score you get on this exam is used to rank you among candidates nationwide. No other scores in your life or school career matter. Your high school letters, recommendation, your high school scores, none of these matter at all, just the exam. And so your rank from the national exam determines which of your preferences you get into, which of the IITs you get into. Yes, some of them are considered ranked higher than others. It also determines your discipline, the computer science being one of the most sought after disciplines. Everything depends on your rank. So only higher ranks get into computer science in the best of the IITs. The year that I wrote the IIT JEE in 1994, about 200,000 students wrote the exam across the entire nation of India. Out of them, only about the top 2,000 or 3,000 students got into IITs at all in any discipline. And among these couple of thousands, only the top 48 ranks in the entire nation of India, the second most populous nation in the world, got into the most sought after location, IIT Madras or IIT Chennai's Computer Science batch. All my 6 guests today, as well as I, are among these IIT Madras or IIT Chennai's Computer Science batch in 1994. In today's episode, 7 students, that's 1/4 or 25% of the computer science batch of IIT Madras that graduated in 1998. All in one room, all discussing our journeys 23 years after we graduated with our bachelors. Today's episode is the first of 2 parts. Part 1, today, covers the individual journeys of each of our 6 guests. Next week, in part 2, is the free-ranging discussion among all 7 of us. Surprises abound as we discover new things about each other's backgrounds that we did not know before. And some of us make surprising revelations about how our outlook has changed in the 2.5 decades since we came to the US. And some of us divulge surprising plans for our futures. The episode guide for all episodes is available on our website, csimmigrant.org. Again, that's csimmigrant.org. Here we go. Joining me on today's episode of the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast, I have with me 6 computer scientists who were in the same batch in their Bachelor of Technology program for Computer Science and Engineering in the Indian Institute of Technology, or IIT, in Chennai, India, then known as Madras. So I might call it as IIT Chennai or IIT Madras. Anyway, all 6 of my guests started in IIT Madras in 1994 in the bachelor's program and graduated with their bachelor's in 1998. I myself was also in that same batch, so I'm going to be referring to our group sometimes as we. In 1998, right after we finished our bachelor's, we all immigrated to the US for graduate school to different universities. My 6 guests today have master's and PhD degrees from MIT, Stanford, University of Illinois, 2 of them, and University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, 2 of them. And although we each finished graduate school in different years, some of us with a master's and some of us with a PhD, we all continued to stay in the US. We became immigrant computer scientists. During those 4 years, 94 to 98 in the bachelor's program at IIT Madras, the 7 of us here, along with our other batchmates, I think about 30 or so, in total, attended the same classes. We stayed in the same dorm hall, which we call a hostel in India. We ate the same food and drank the same water. Opinions vary about the quality of those. We watched the same movies. Again, opinions vary about quality of those. And we read the same books. I cannot tell you how much joy it gives me to talk to these brothers of mine today for the Immigrant Computer Scientist podcast. I'm delighted to welcome my 6 guests today: Balaji Srinivasan, Praveen Patnala, Rajasekhar Krishnamurthy, Ramesh Chandra, Shankar Ponekanti, and Sriram Salapa. All 6 of my batchmates and guests today are based currently and live in the California, San Francisco Bay Area. 3 of them are or have been startup founders, and the remaining 3 of them have spent over a decade at a single company, and some of them belong to both the groups. I'll introduce the startup founders first, one by one, in alphabetical order of their first name, asking each of them one question. Then I'll talk to the long timers, and then I have some questions for the entire group. And as usual, we will digress when interesting avenues appear in the conversation. Here we go. First up is Praveen Patnala, who is currently co-founder and chief architect of Valtix, which is a stealth mode startup. It's a cloud-native network security platform for enterprises. He's been there since 2018, which is when the company was founded. Valtix has been wildly successful. Online information says it's received over $27 million of funding, including Series A funding. Numbers are probably higher than my information here. Bit of Praveen's chronological story. He grew up in the Indian state of Odisha, or Odisha as it is known today, in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was in the IIT Madras batch, as I mentioned earlier. Then he moved to the US. From 98 to 2000, he finished his Master of Science in Computer Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, also known as UNC. From 2000 to 2010, he was at multiple companies, started at Yahoo, first job after grad school, then at Cisco, Andiamo, Nexi. And from 2010 to 2015, he was a director of engineering at Bloomreach. He was at LaserLike in 2016, which was acquired by Apple. And then he spent a brief while in Google in 2018 before he founded Valtix. Welcome, Praveen. Tell us what made you take the jump from working in the big tech companies, you worked in many of them, into founding a startup.
Thank you, Indranil. It's a pleasure talking to you and also be among my long-time friends and classmates. Thanks for the intro, by the way, also about myself and the journey, right? So in the industry, I've been there, for like 20 years now, 20 plus, and I worked at a few very, very large companies like Cisco, later on Google. And personally, I'm pretty ambitious. So even though I was at Cisco, I came to Cisco through an acquisition called Andiamo. And one thing then I stayed on in Cisco for a few years, right? And when I joined Google, it was already a 100,000 people company. So the opportunity as an engineer to make a difference in a very, very large company is actually, it's very hard to make a huge difference, right? So in general, that is true. And I always had an ambition to build something from scratch, which could be widely used by either end users or enterprises, right? And with Valtix, we had an idea. We went to investors. The idea was picked very favorably by the investors. We got funded very, very quickly, right? And today, within 3.5 years, we have built something that is pretty remarkable, and it is already used by 20 plus enterprises. So I'm very proud of what we have achieved as a team, not just as an individual. Building something like this from 0 to 1 in a large company like Google is very, very hard. Although companies like Google especially are very, very entrepreneurial. So there are exceptions where people can make a huge difference. But I found it hard to see. Plus, I had an opportunity to build something from scratch. I took the plunge. And I'm very happy with what we have done. There is a long way to go. We are about 40 people. The numbers you provided are correct, 27 million in funding. And the product is used by 20 large, pretty well-known enterprises in the Bay Area. I mean, actually all over the world. And we look forward to having a big success in the future.
Would you say your experience at Google and the big companies helped you in the startup? So in a parallel world where you're not working in any of these big companies, do you think your experience may have been different, less in founding the startup and making it as successful as it is?
Actually, the product that we are building, right, happens to be very, very relevant to both at Google Cloud where I was working as well as Cisco. They're very related because what we have built is a network security product, and a lot of that foundation knowledge I gained in Cisco when I was there. And I was working in a very similar space in Google, although it was a very, very short time. So personally, it helped me build the right architecture for the product itself, right? So what we have built is, network security as a service based on a SDN style model, software-defined networking model, decoupled control plane, and data plane, right? The network inspection engine. And I work on the control plane. Turns out, specifically for this idea, I used to work on a very similar product in Cisco in a more data center-like appliance embedded systems product. And in Google, I was working on the same thing, but at a much, much larger scale, right? The Google, the controller or the policy management plane that I was working is one of the largest distributed applications on earth, actually. So it actually helped me define build the right product, the right architecture at Valtix. That is that's the technical part of the answer. But I think in general, the experiences from both Cisco and Google, they do help me both building a company with the right culture and everything. Also, we are building something that is really enterprise class, right? That is it's not like a open source or like a DevOps software which people can use, they can live with the deficiencies, etc. What we are building is for very large scale enterprises where the margin of error is very low, right? If we fail in the field, they will just disconnect us, right? Because if we fail in the field, people lose jobs, right? This is what I learned in Cisco. That is, you build very high class enterprise class products which are tested, QA'd for like years before it is actually in the field. Now we want to match that with the cloud speed where we can build quickly and customers can use rapidly, but it still has to be enterprise class, right? So both those experiences helped me build the right architecture, but also follow those best practices in terms of enterprise software.
Thank you for the beautiful description. So if our listeners want to learn more about Voltix, they can go to the website.
Yes, the website is voltix.com and you can email us at info@voltix.com.
Thank you, Praveen. Up next is Ramesh Chandra. Ramesh has had an interestingly circuitous route between industry and academia. He's currently a software engineer at Databricks, where he has been since 2021, just earlier this year. Before that, Ramesh's story in chronological order. He grew up in the state of then Andhra Pradesh in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was at IIT Madras in Computer Science and Engineering with all of us. After that, from 98 to 2000, he did his Master of Science in Computer Science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, also known as UIUC. After that, 2000 to 2005, he was at Stanford University as a PhD student. And also at the same time, he was a co-founder and principal engineer at the startup company Mocha5 from 2005 to 2012. That's when the company lasted. And then in 2009, Ramesh decided to go back to grad school and got a PhD from MIT from 2009 to 2013. And then again, he's not left the startup world. He has been co-founder and CTO of Compass Quality Insight, which was there from 2012 to 2013. He worked 5 years at Nutanix since 2014, then a couple of years at Google, and then, of course, more recently at Databricks. Welcome, Ramesh. Tell us what made you go back for a PhD after being a startup founder.
So that's a question I get asked a lot. Why go back to grad school? So I always wanted to go back, do a PhD and wanted to explore the academics space first. And so I realized that the window of opportunity is there's only so much window of opportunity. So at the time, around 2009, I was thinking of like what to do next. And I had the person at MIT I was working with is someone I worked with before, and so he had like an interesting project.
This was your advisor? Or?
That was my advisor at MIT, right? So we had a very good working relationship. I thought it's a good opportunity to go. So one important thing is like when I made these shifts and jumps, one important criterion for me was the people I work with, right? So that's why I moved from Bay Area all the way to Boston.
Would you say you have learned things from your PhD that have really given you an edge in the entrepreneurial world?
Yeah, I think the important thing I learned from the group I worked at MIT was the precision with which they get things done. So it was the experience there was kind of Socratic in a sense, like where my advisor as well as the people around him, including Robert Morris and Franz Kaushik, right? They had a style of...
and your advisor was Nikolai Zeldovich?
My advisor was Nikolai Zeldovich. They had an approach of asking a lot of questions. So when you come up with an idea, they'll kind of... They will ask a lot of questions and with not give you the answer straight away, right? So you would have to go explore the space, come up with the answers, and then you get challenged again. You have to kind of keep figuring it out until the argument is watertight, right? So that process was very helpful in my later journey, and The one interesting thing is from my previous startup journey, right? The reason why one of the things I learned from my Mocha 5 experience and also Compass was the importance of customer focus, the product focus, right? As and applying technology to the product. So technology by itself isn't helpful in the startup world, right? You need to kind of be able to marry that to the right product and right problem that you're solving for a customer. So thinking about customer problems and the products at the same level of rigor, right, is helpful. And that's another thing where my PhD experience helped.
So for PhD students, for our listeners who are grad students, would you say there are things that you learned from the entrepreneurial world that helped you be a better PhD student, that today's PhD students perhaps can look at that and have an edge?
Yeah, I think so. This is more a systems. This answer is more focused to the systems folks, right? Who systems PhDs and systems work has a lot of applications in industry. So one thing which will be helpful for folks, one industry experience helps in picking the right PhD problem, systems problem for your PhD research, because the success of a systems PhD, in large part, is determined by the impact it has, and impact is determined by the kind of the amount of adoption and real world application it has, right? And so if you're working in the industry, you have a sense, and you are also actively looking for the kinds of customer problems, not just at the technical part, but actually looking at what the technical problem is solving. And then you are able to you go into a PhD with that knowledge that can help you a lot in terms of finding the right problem, because finding the right problem, as we know, is probably 80% of the work.
Yes. Our next guest is Shankar Ponekanti. Shankar represents a great segue from the startup group, the long timers group, as he belongs to both groups. Shankar is currently a co-founder at the startup Trust Lab since 2020. This is an early stage startup. Before that, Shankar's story in chronological order, he grew up in the state of then Andhra Pradesh in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was in the IIT Madras Computer Science and Engineering batch with all of us. After that, from 98 to 2004, he finished his PhD in computer science from Stanford University. From 2005 to 2020, he spent 15 years at Google, where he was a distinguished engineer. And then at 2020, he founded his company's Trust Lab. Welcome, Shankar. Again, similar to what I asked Praveen earlier, tell us what made you take the jump into a startup, but in your case, after such a long time in a single company at Google.
Thank you, Indranil. This is really a fun conversation. And I also really appreciated hearing the insights from Praveen and Ramesh. Even though I talk to them all the time, it's very interesting to hear the way they put their responses. So I was at Google for 15 years, had a really amazing time there. Lots of great people at Google, some of the industry's best work there. Towards the end, I was working on content safety at YouTube. So I was working on classifiers for all the videos that are uploaded on YouTube and the labels that are produced by the classifiers. Of course, I was not doing this alone. There was a very large team. And the labels were used for various applications, like which videos to surface on YouTube's homepage, which videos are okay to recommend on Watch Next surface, which videos are okay to show in YouTube Kids, and also what videos are okay to monetize, meaning show ads on. So I found the problem very, very technically challenging, in part because understanding what a video is about, current technology is actually not adequate, even though every day progress is happening, leaps and bounds, as new techniques come up in natural language, machine learning, machine vision, all of those things. But more than the technical part, I also thought that the problem was very meaningful to the society, because there is a middle ground that you need to find between free speech on the one hand, and also safety on the other hand, right? Because if you just don't control what content gets uploaded on YouTube, then a lot of bad content can get uploaded and can go viral, and that can have all sorts of bad impact on society.
And that's been happening, of course.
To some extent, certainly, right? So, in fact, we had some big escalations while I was there at YouTube, where I learned a lot actually about these types of issues, how to not just like the technical part of it, but how do you actually manage the situation from the standpoint of customers and end users and regulators and all of that. So yeah, I found the problem very meaningful, the technology very interesting. But towards the end, I realized that there could actually be an even bigger opportunity to work on the same problem outside Google. Because there's lots of up-and-coming companies that are dealing with similar challenges with content. And also, the line between bad content and kind of, there are times when you are actioning on the content itself, and there are times when you are actioning on the actors who are uploading the content. And when you look across online websites, they have lots of challenges from both bad content and bad actors. And I felt that from my YouTube experience, I could build similar systems, industry-wide solutions that other up-and-coming companies can leverage. And so there could be a good business opportunity here, was the thesis. Of course, I didn't start the company alone, so I had two other great co-founders who I also worked with in Google, but they also brought experience from other smaller companies. And their experiences and vision was quite similar to mine. So after 15 years, I was anyway looking for a change. And so when this opportunity came, I was pretty excited.
Do you feel like you could have executed this startup inside of Google? And I want to ask that in like two parallel worlds. In today's Google, and then the older Google, like 10 years ago, in the early days when you joined Google, because at that point was a much smaller company, much more nimble, much more agile. Do you think it could have been executed, if Google was that young today, could have been executed inside of Google?
I mean, Google is a pretty big company. There's many parts of the company, and there are parts like Google X where they are coming up with new ideas all the time and trying to go from 0 to 1. And then there are parts like Search and YouTube, which are pretty mature. So some part of your answer to your question is yes. I mean, it's possible in certain parts of the company to go and build stuff right from the ground up. However, one challenge you do have at Google is that because Google has huge revenue, right, at this point, I mean, it's a public company, everybody can look at the revenue numbers. One challenge is that small successes don't count for much. Of course, I'm not speaking officially in any kind of Google capacity, but I'm saying that, I mean, you can just do the math, right? So if you come up with a product that has 100 million in revenues, it's wash in the bucket for the company, right? So they have to plan, they have to think very big stuff, right? So that's why, like, for example, recently there have been interest in Google Cloud because it's one of the areas where there's opportunity to build like a very big business, right? But lots of other areas, not so much, right? And because even if you are widely successful by any other standard, it may not make much of a difference for Google, right? So from that standpoint, like even the content safety area, right? I mean, Google could, for example, offer services for other companies, and maybe it might. I'm not saying that it won't, but I'm saying that the potential. I mean, that business has to be sufficiently big for Google to get into it. Otherwise, it's kind of not very meaningful for them to spread their energy or kind of spend their energy on that, right? So.
Okay, thank you. You're listening to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. This episode, 24, is a conversation with 6 Indian technologists in the US, all of them IIT Chennai, India graduates from 1998. So those were our startup founders, and now we come to the long-timers. So first up is Balaji Srinivasan, who is currently a director of engineering at SAP Ariba. He's been there since 2019. Again, chronologically, Balaji's story. He grew up in the state of Tamil Nadu in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was with us at IIT Madras, Computer Science Batch. 98 to 2000, he got his Master of Science in Computer Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, UIUC. From 2000, when he graduated from UIUC until 2015, he was at Oracle, 15 years. Then he spent a couple of years at Tin3 and Era. And then since 2019, he's been at SAP. Welcome, Balaji. Tell us what made you change jobs after 15 years at Oracle.
So, inertia is a big killer in this industry. A lot of people stay put, not by choice, but by inertia. They're in a comfortable space. It's hard to change. There are other things that they need to take care of, mortgage, kids, family, and so on. But the industry, the pace at which the industry is changing invariably forces them to take some step one way or the other. Right? So mine was also similar. I moonlighted on multiple startups in the early 2000s, was pretty ambitious, like what Praveen was saying. But as time went on, other things got prioritized with family and kids and all that. So this opportunity came across in 2015, and that's when I decided to move from a bigger company to a late stage startup, then went to an early stage startup, and then back to a bigger company.
And have you thought of a startup in today's world?
Frankly, over the time, I've become very cynical about the capitalistic society that we've been, especially the bubble that we are in the Bay Area. And the dubious sources of money that comes in that essentially funds the startup system here. The valuations and if you look at the overall income disparity between the general people that are around and then folks like us, right? A lot of it I question. So in my mind, the way the startup systems work here, the way the funding comes in from places unknown, all that I question a lot. So I personally don't see myself fitting into that space.
Do you feel like we are in the middle of another bubble that might burst?
Economically, yes, but more than that, right? The way it has shifted to the wealth going into one direction, right? So if you see in 10 years, I don't know whether people with other jobs can even stay in Bay Area as they see here. It might become another Manhattan kind of place, right? So those things worry me a lot more than, going to making the next big breakthrough.
One thing I want to ask you, Balaji, is you've also done a lot of, I don't want to say hobbies, but because these are large undertakings on the side. You organize several quiz competitions in the Bay Area, which are extremely well attended. Yeah. You have written and directed plays in Tamil, which are, again, very well attended. Tell us a little bit about those.
So one thing I realized was, if you're in the rat race, you tend to lose your work-life balance. And you are essentially saving up for the last 10, 20 years of your life where you don't have the energy to do what you want to do. So my focus has been to do the things that I love. And this has taken me to co-write screenplays, be a part of book clubs, work with authors, direct plays, and more recently a lot of quizzing as well. And I consider my main achievement is not in the career space, but more in being a part of what my kids go through. I teach math on the side, so that has been a very enriching experience for me as well.
It's actually heartening to hear this, because sometimes when people think of the Silicon Valley Bay Area, they think, everything is driven there, it's all work focused. But it's nice that you have actually been able to balance it out fairly significantly, more than most people do, with a lot of...
I mean, it is a conscious decision, and it comes with its own caveats as well, right? Yeah. Right.
The fact that the environment has allowed you to do that and you managed to do that, I think that's a good sign for everyone.
Yeah, for some reason, I've been able to find positions where I have that bandwidth to work on things that I am interested in.
Is there any trick to finding such positions? A silver bullet? You can say no. But I have to ask.
No, I mean, there is, right? I mean, we tend to put pressure on ourselves artificially a lot, right? So if a mail comes on a Saturday evening, there is no necessity for you to respond to it before Monday morning. It's up to us to put the boundaries and say, I'm going to reserve this time for something else that I like to do a lot.
Thank you. Moving along, up next is Rajasekhar Krishnamurthy, who works at IBM, where he is Principal Research Staff Member and Senior Manager in Watson Discovery. I'm going to ask whether IBM and Watson Discovery are different things or not. I'll ask that soon. Before that, Rajasekhar's story in chronological order. He grew up in the state of Tamil Nadu in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was with us at IIT Madras in the Computer Science and Engineering batch. From 98 to 2004, he did his PhD in computer science from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. From 2004 to the current day, he has been at IBM, so 17 years and running at IBM. He was with IBM Research Almaden, and then more recently with Watson Discovery. Welcome, Rajasekhar. Tell us a little bit about your work at Watson Discovery and what made you stay at IBM, a wonderful company. I've worked at IBM too. It's a wonderful company. I think you have been a long timer there, more than the rest of us here at the table.
Thanks, Indranil, for having me here. Okay. So, I've been in IBM for 17 years. Right? But depending on how you look at it, it's been a single job or it's been many different jobs. Right? In big companies, if you have the right opportunities and you're able to leverage it, you can do different things. For example, for about 14 years, I was in research, right, from 2004 to 2018. In those 14 years, there was about half a dozen, or the first 6 years were focused on one set of problems, right, which was a continuation from what I was doing in my PhD, but a 180-degree difference in how it was approached. The whole idea was, how do you derive value from data? That's been the common theme in my career, right? From my PhD all the way till date, right? And each stage has allowed me to look at different aspects. And as I said, in the first 6 years, it was looking at text as a source, right? We as humans understand text, right? And leverage search engines, leverage other systems. But when it comes to whether you call it AI, whether you call it whatever your fancy term is for today, there's a big gap in building systems that are going to be trustworthy, explainable, and can actually incrementally improve. So that was the focus for the first 6 years, which continued since then. But then for the next 6 years, it was around how do you link data that is coming from outside an individual's control or an enterprise's control with data that is generated by an individual or an enterprise, right? Linked open data was one of the main areas where a lot of public data was coming out. So between 2010 and 2016, a lot of my focus was around how do you understand such data sets and how do you link that with an enterprise's view of an individual and in a constructive way bring value to the enterprise and to the individual, right? And as I was doing this over about 14 years, all along worked with clients. Right? So one good thing about IBM research, and in particular Almaden where I worked, was culture of working with real data, real clients was just common. You didn't need to make too much of an effort.
From the very beginning.
From the very beginning. So for example, just between 2011 and 2016, I personally worked with about 6 Fortune 50 companies and worked with clients, including startups, right, and so on. That breadth then allowed me to say, okay, try something closer to real clients. And that's when I moved to the product division, right? And Watson Discovery is one of the products in IBM's data and AI organization, right? And I lead that team today. And the whole idea of the product is, how do you help people understand content and answer questions, right? But using more recent technology, right? For example, as employees, if I have a question, we have to go and look at content within the organization. Everyone knows that content is very hard to understand, especially content that is not for the billions of people. Anything on the web, a lot of effort is put in content creation and content consumption. Anything within an enterprise, right? Or anything as a consumer. For example, when I first switched to a electric car a few years ago, I don't know what an L gear meant. I don't know what regenerative braking means, right? So all of this is in manuals, right? If someone comes to repair the cable, they have to look up manuals, right? So how do you help derive through structure and semantics of those documents better systems? It's not going to match a human. It's going to help humans do their job better and faster, right? And also train a new generation of employees in various organizations.
I want to ask a little bit about the culture in IBM and IBM research. So when we were in grad school in the early 2000s and, when we were in the job markets, in whatever years we were in the job markets, there were research labs that could do blue sky research. IBM research was one of them, but Microsoft research was there. HP Labs was around then and pretty large. And there were several other companies. And over time, some of those research labs have kind of subsided or been subsumed by the product divisions. IBM Research has still stayed its large size, but my understanding is from talking with former students and colleagues that it has become a lot more product-facing than it used to be. Is that been your experience too?
As you said, IBM Research has gone through many transformations, right? Adapting to change has been the single reason why it has survived, right? So in this era where people move from academia to industry and back so often, right? When startups are founded by PhD students and professors and they become $1 billion, right? It's important for within a company for people to move back and forth between research and development. And more importantly, for people to have a culture of it's our job to make something succeed, right? So it's not I build something in research and hope someone else will take it to market. That doesn't succeed. So that culture has gone through many transformations, right? And if you look at history, in the 90s, there was a very harder shift towards more product focus in research. Then it opened up a bit. So that pendulum keeps swinging, right? And depending on the area, that pendulum is going to be different. Like quantum computing, for example, right? Came completely out of research, right? So there are going to be big bets. And then there are going to be medium-term bets. And in a medium-term bet, you don't have the luxury to say, I'll come back in 5 years because the rest of the world is moving very fast. And depending on individuals and teams' interests, you'll see that there's a mixture available.
This is a conversation with 6 Indian technologists in the US, all of them IIT Chennai, India graduates from 1998. You're listening to the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast. Okay, next up is Sriram Sellappa, who is currently a member of the technical staff at Arista Networks. He's been there since 2008, so 13 years and running. Before that, Sriram's story in chronological order. He grew up in the state of Tamil Nadu in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. From 94 to 98, he was in the IIT Madras Computer Science and Engineering batch with us, as I mentioned earlier. From 98 to 2000, he finished his Master of Science in Computer Science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, also known as UNC. After he finished grad school in 2000, he worked at Yahoo for 1 year and then 1 year at Nexi. And then he was for a couple of years at Andiamo Systems. From 2004 to 8, he was technical lead at Cisco, and then since then, from 2008, he's been at Arista. Welcome, Sriram. I want to ask you 2 questions. The first question I want to ask you is about your work at Arista and what has made you not make the jump into startup world, or maybe you've thought about it. I want to ask about that, and then I have another question which I'll ask you later.
Thank you, Andranil, for that lovely introduction. And this is a great opportunity to reconvene, have a discussion with the longtime friends of mine. So, I moved. Praveen and me share a long path. We went to the same college and we shared same careers early on. So, of course, we came to Bay Area because this is the world of startups, and that's what excited me when I graduated. I was pondering whether to do a PhD. Then it was pretty clear within a few months of into grad school that I wanted to get into the industry. And even while looking for a career, it was pretty clear I want to be in Bay Area. So it was straightforward. When I came here, I started off with Yahoo. Again, Yahoo, all this .com bubble was in full swing at that time, and so that was the prime companies to be in. But it was already sort of at a scale that the innovation wasn't at the level that I expected. So, like within a few months, I was not getting the work satisfaction I was expecting. So that's what made me jump, move to startups, and then the bubble crashed. So I had to move to another startup. Fortunately, that was successful. It was acquired by Cisco. I was in Cisco in an established company. And then after getting that experience also, I chose to go into startup. So anyway, long story short, so I was primarily in the networking industry by that time of the career. And naturally, I wanted to go back to startup, and I was looking for a startup which is still exciting, right, in the networking industry. By that time, the networking industry has lost its charm. Like companies like Google were sort of the attractive companies at that time. But I wanted to, I still found networking interesting, so I wanted to go to a company. So, and I found this Arista Networks. At that time, it was called Arasta. So I actually didn't pay attention to it as much, and I decided to move out. And there was a storage company I had an offer from. It was Nimble Storage, which was later acquired by HP. So I had a call from a recruiter and said, "Oh, hey, there's this company, you want to come and interview?" So I said, "Okay, anyway, what do I have to lose?" I went and talked to them. So it turned out it was a company started by Andy Buchtelchim. He's one of the investors in Google, early investors in Google. And somehow something, somehow identified me with that company, right? The people, the culture.
Something clicked.
Yeah, something clicked. Right, so the co-founder, one of the co-founders was like Chandra. He was also a Stanford, MIT, PhD. Yeah, it's been 13 years since I've been at that company, and almost every day, I don't really feel bored, so I haven't looked outside. When I started, we were about 20 engineers. Now there are probably 1,000. I don't have the exact count, but it's probably 1,500 plus engineers.
Many orders of magnitude growth.
So it's a big company, and for that scale, of course, we were. So I still work with the same set of people, course people I started out with, and so I took on more management role. Right now, I'm a director of software engineer. Also, one of the cool innovative things that I've done compared to other companies is being able to partner with customers and put together a solution, because there are some things that they can do better, which is develop controllers to manage their networks, and we provide sort of the features and the infrastructure needed to integrate with that. So that's those sort of partnership has also been very successful in Arista.
The next question I want to ask you is actually a segue to a broader question I want to ask everyone. So, Sriram, when we were writing the IIT joint entrance exam in 1994, which was a nationwide exam, you came as the top ranker in the country among the scheduled CAS or SC. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges you faced in preparing for the IIT JEE exam? Because your experiences are going to be very unique compared to many others out there.
So I grew up in a small town called Madurai. I was born in Madurai. It's one of the. It's very famous. It's a very old city. It's going back history, 1,000+ years. But then, in terms of technology or education, it was very limited. Anyway, my father was working for government, so he had transferable jobs. So pretty early on, we I moved to Chennai. It turned out, so because of all of the transfers he had to go through through his career, I ended up studying in almost 8 schools.
Wow.
Throughout from kindergarten to 12th grade. So it turned out, and also I heard about IIT sometime during my 8th grade or 7th grade, that there's this thing called IIT and people have to prepare. It's not just the academic marks, the grades are not enough. You need to. So I started looking into it. At that time I was in a small town called Salem. So the only thing that is famous for is a steel plant over there. There weren't any coaching centers for IIT. So the only option for me there was to join this Brilliance tutorial program, which is a postal program. So they send you book materials every month, and that's what I used to prepare.
Did your dad and your mom were they instrumental in your desire to go to IIT? Was there a history in the family of being engineers and going to IIT?
So my dad was an engineer. So he went to Anna University, which was a college right opposite to IIT. And he of course he grew up in a village, and so that was probably in the family. He was the first person who went to college. So certainly I was sort of had a passion for going into engineering very early on. My even father asked me, "Do you really want to do engineering? Do you want to consider going to medicine?" I was point blank. I said, "I want to go into engineering."
It was a no-brainer. Yeah.
So, but I didn't. They didn't instigate me towards IIT or anything. They certainly gave a lot of importance for education, right? So they would go to extreme, whatever it is, education is the top priority. But then they didn't really put pressure or even instigate me towards IIT. Yeah. I was introduced to IIT by my sister. My sister also was an engineer. She also studied in Anna University. She told me about IIT, said, okay, you know what, I've been to this college, but then there's this college right across, which is top-notch, and it will give you a lot more opportunities if you study. And so that's what interested me. Yeah. And for me, studying for IIT was just motivated by myself.
Right. So, sorry, I interrupted you earlier. So you were talking about Brilliance tutorials and how you prepared. Was that the only thing you did, or did you do any other coaching?
So that's what I did for about a couple of years. Yeah. And then it turned out that during my 12th grade, we moved back to Chennai. And
so it's another one of your 8 moves.
Yes, that was the last school. That's the 8th school. So by the time I was already in this program, right? So like a multi-year program. So I was already midway through it. But they also, Brilliance Tutorials had a 4-month program which you can go attend in the class. So I would also go attend that. So at the end of the school, I would go. I'll catch a bus, travel for 1 hour, attend the class. So the class would be from somewhere 6 o'clock to like 8 o'clock. So I would go back and then reach home at 9 o'clock. So I did that for about 4 months. But these are the two. I basically exclusively with Brilliance Tutorials, a mix of postal and this short in-person sessions, and that was helpful. I mean, for that time, for the level of coaching they provided, it was helpful as well.
So that actually segues to a general question I want to ask everyone, and anyone can jump in here. So, 1994, before we all met, before we all got into IIT. We wrote the joint entrance exam, the JE, which is fairly competitive. Even back then, there was about 100,000, 200,000 students who wrote it, and essentially only the cream got in. And all of us are among the topmost ranks in the country here back in 1994. And it hasn't really changed much there. Back then we had 5 IITs, I think, maybe 6. Depending on how you count. And now there's more, but it's still, the entrance exam is still fairly competitive. I want to ask each of you, and anyone who can jump in here, what was the hardest thing in preparing for the IIT JE entrance exam in 94?
So I would say the hardest, at least for me, is access to know what to do to prepare, right? Uh, Over the years, I've become very conflicted with the way what JE has stood for, and especially last year when my son went through the high school admission process here, right? It's sometimes it's mind-boggling to see that the JE system still remains. In spite of what it claims that it's all merit-based and it's open for all, and if you study well and do well in an exam, you can get through. That is the one-liner. In practical, at least in that time, right, it was very limited to people who had knowledge of how to crack this, and it still continues to be, I guess, in some way or the other, right? If you look at admission process here, for example, where kids are evaluated against other kids with similar backgrounds, with similar opportunities, and what they are able to achieve in that space. And they are looked at for what they've done through their high school, as opposed to a system where it blindly gives you, this is what you need to know to crack the exam, which is not often taught in your high school syllabuses, right? You are expected to go out and learn it and master it and be competitive in it and have access to exactly what kind of questions are asked before, how do you solve it, these are the N books that you need to read, and so on. It's some way it's a system that is kind of inherently built to shut out a lot of communities and a lot of people.
People with less resources.
Right. And this was fairly obvious from our batch as well, right? So you could see that the ones who got in were from very similar backgrounds, with some exceptions, of course. Small town kids were shut out. Ones who didn't have access to these kind of resources or private coaching were shut out. So I would, for me, I also had a similar experience like Sriram, right? I was in a small town called Vellore, where I was till the end of my 9th grade. And nobody in my family had, gone to IIT or anything like that. For some reason, because I used to do well in class, someone had told my parents, who had no clue about engineering or anything like that, oh, this is a place where you can go, and if he does well in the exam, he can get in. And the main thing was the cost is low.
Yeah.
Right? So for that, they moved to Chennai because of that when I was in 10th. Because there was no way to prepare in that small town. Yeah. And as you can see in retrospect, not that many families have the ability to do that, right? And the whole fact that came here, then found some place where there was some coaching, latched on to that and did that, and finally cracked an exam which didn't take anything into account as what I did over the last 4 years. Yeah. Right? So in some way, we were product of a system that was inherently flawed, but we kind of waded through it. And I would say that is, I'm not too proud of cracking that system and coming into here.
Would you say that the nature of the exam has changed quite a bit? So, when we wrote IIT JEE, it was there was a little bit of multiple choice, but largely it was the main exam was descriptive answer. You had to write descriptive answers. Right. Now it's largely multiple choice. Do you think that has leveled the playing field a little bit for some students?
It has, but there are a lot of other things also in play now, right? Now you can see the similar argument being made in terms of the medical entrance examination with NEET and all the protests that are going on about NEET implementation, right? So ideally, for a level playing field, someone who is learning through just their school, having their school syllabus, should be able to do it, or should be able to provide material as to why they should be selected for this program, right? Or even if you look at the UK model, where they say, you do these things, you get so many grades in your A levels, then you automatically qualify for this university. or you qualify for some other university. We need to think of moving in that direction, right? Rather than have this arbitrary merit-based exam, which you may not be able to crack if you are from a different kind of society.
Yeah. The access to opportunity and training certainly comes up even in the case of US exams like SAT.
Exactly. That's exactly why you were saying that SATs were not that. My son at some point of time was saying, "Oh, this is unfair. I've done this thing. I've cracked SATs. I've done all this. Now, why is it now? Why the university is not looking at it?" Right. But in the bigger point of view, now it is clearly proven that a high score in SAT is more correlating to your background and your opportunity rather than your mental aptitude itself.
So I was in Chennai, right? And
Big city.
big city, and also tutors were there, right? And that's definitely an opportunity that plays a significant role in who gets into IIT, which I think is true at every stage in anyone's career, right? So if you ask me what was the challenge and what did I learn, one challenge was trying to prioritize what you study, knowing that you may get it or you may not get it, because the IIT system is completely different from the school system, right? So therefore, you have to learn how to go on two paths and balancing your time, your effort, and your energy, right? In hindsight, it was not a challenge then, but thinking about it 10 years later, 15 years later, even something as simple as when we wrote the exam, chemistry, physics, and mathematics were the three subjects. And I believe they were equally weighted, right? I, as an individual, needed to know, okay, what is my strength, play to that strength to the maximum, and learn the subject where you're weakest, right? So that you don't really fall too much. So those were certain lessons that I learned, right, while preparing. Once the exams are over and we got into IIT, I think the biggest lesson was learning how to work with peers, right, was as smarter than you, right? So when you are going from one level to the next level, right, you try to optimize, but then you find out you're in a new level playing field, right? And those were some lessons which have helped personally, continuously over the career, because when you do a master's, when you do a PhD, when you work, right, every stage you have to play to your strengths, and you also need to understand how to respect others.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've never thought about it that way.
My experience has been similar to Sriram's, right? In the sense, I come from a smaller town. I'm not in the. I was not. I think Shankar is probably in the same boat as me. Where we come from the same smaller towns, so we didn't have access to the coaching centers, etc. So we had it. And we in my town, I guess before me, the one person who went to IIT was like maybe 6 years before.
Oh
me,
wow!
right?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Not even family. It's like in your town.
Yeah. So we knew that person went to IIT, and then he was kind of. The way I knew about it is my brother tried for it for a few months and then didn't really pursue it. So I kind of knew, okay, there's something called IIT, right? So figuring out how to prepare for this exam, which is which I have no clue about, was a challenge. But I think it kind of boiled down to using the material which my brother had, and then there was one. I think for physics there was one teacher in my college who was teaching it. So he was giving after school classes or whatever for an hour or so. So that was what helped me. But it was super hard. Super hard figuring it out when you don't know what level, what you need to calibrate against. Right. So it in hindsight, it wasn't obvious that I would have gotten through. It just so happened that I got through. I know of many friends who would, if given guidance, at least a few of my friends from my town would have probably at least gotten through IIT at some level. But they kind of through halfway through, they just, I think to Shekhar's point, right? Like it's about prioritizing. Do I optimize for a different engineering entrance exam, because there were different kinds of engineering entrance exams which are not all the same, which all don't follow the same syllabus or the same curriculum or same format, and so they optimized for a different set of engineering exams, and so because that's what they thought, like they had a higher chance of getting in. So I think that was the hardest part, getting in. But I think the journey of to Shekhar's point, I guess like the journey helped me be able to learn how to learn. Right? Like go and figure out things and learn how to learn, which helped me along the way, I guess.
So that's very good. So Shankar, you also came from a fairly small town, and Praveen, you also as well. So I guess Rajshekhar and I are the only ones in like a big city. But I'd love to hear your
which is kind of unusual for our batch, though.
Yeah.
If you look at the population in IIT, this is kind of this is not representative.
Well, in my case, it was similar to Ramesh's experience. My brother actually had also been to IIT, so even though I was from a small town and there's not that much kind of awareness or like coaching opportunities within that town, I had the other big advantage that my brother had gone through the same process, and so I kind of knew what to expect in a way. So I always think for him it must have been hard, but like for me it was not. And yet I didn't manage to get the same. I mean, he got a better rank than me, so I'm like, that's terrible.
So for me, it is, it's actually interesting going back in time, like almost, 20 years?
27 years.
27 years, right? So I actually come from a family of professionals. My dad was a civil engineer. He went to REC. So he went to, it's called RIT, so Regional Institute of Technology, Jamshedpur. It is basically equivalent of REC. Now it is called NIT, right? So he always knew the value of IIT, and he always used to inspire me that, okay, I think when you grow up, if you want to be a doctor, we actually prefer you to be a doctor. They wanted me to be a doctor.
So there was a subtle pressure.
There was a pressure, but, by the time I was in 10th, I realized my interest was in maths, right? Maths and science was my interest. I used to like biology, but I said, okay, I'm actually going to be only in engineering, right? So I made my choice clear, and they said, okay, I think because I could not get into IIT, at least you should get into, right? So they inspired me. My brother also was, he's 1 year senior to me academically. He could not get into IIT. He joined a state engineering college in Bhubaneswar. So the mindset was there, although we came from a small town, because we were part of, family where others have cracked similar things, so it was there. And my cousin actually, he grew up in Rourkela, so he always used to inspire me, because they're much, he himself could not get into an IT, but whenever I would meet him in holidays, he would say, okay, that's what you want to study, right? Now, the interesting thing is, I grew up in a very small town. In fact, I think smaller than everyone here probably. I mean, today it's about 700,000 population. Relatively, it is big. For India standard, is actually not bad. 100 plus. But anyway, so in my time, every 2 years or 3 years, there will be one person who would get into IIT. In fact, my school, there was one guy who was a top 50 into IIT a long time back, right? And somebody I know 5-6 years senior to me, he was a J level. So at the end of 10th, I had a gap of my summer holidays, right? My break. And I took a computer course. So I actually learned basic. And right in that summer, I decided that, okay, actually, if I want to be an engineer, I actually want to be a computer science engineer, right? So this became like, okay, my goal has to be that I have to go into IIT and actually have to study computer science. So there was additional pressure to which I put myself, because this was my aspiration, my goal. And so for that, I had to basically reverse engineer what I have to do to achieve that, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I never could, like Balaji made a very good point about the schooling system here. I think these are great points. At my level of maturity, I didn't have to question it. I just accepted it. It was fine to me to be from a small school, small town, doesn't matter, right? There are no coaching classes, nothing. So, but there was also no additional pressure. It was my goal, my ambition that I have to study computer science at an IIT, which is actually very, very hard, right? Yeah. So I took Agarwal classes, which is actually, I think all of us have taken. So I think, all of us have taken, so we know. So very early on, it was clear that it's very, very hard. I was very diligent in my coursework with the correspondence, and I used to get answers which are like, okay, this is good, that is good, right? And actually, I used to study very hard, by the way. I probably used to average like 12 hours a day, and only for IT, because the college, the education didn't matter. But I wasn't sure where I stood, because calibration was not there, right?
Yeah.
I went for the first Agarwal mock exam in Vizag, which is actually not in my place. And I thought it was I did very poorly. And when I came back home, I told I don't think I'm even going to get 50% of the marks, right? Yeah. Turns out it was actually less than 50%, but the rank came out to be in the top 100.
Yeah, okay.
So that's when I knew, okay, I think it is hard not for me, for everyone. And then as I got closer to the final exams, I actually only improved further. So and I was able to crack it, right? So I give a lot of credit to Agarwal classes. Definitely my parents, especially my dad, because he inspired me. My cousin, my brother. And my cousin, actually, he gave me all the books that were needed, right? Without which, I don't think it would have been possible. It was Agarwal classes, books, and my own perseverance, my own ambition, right? So the books were everything, like, Resnick Halliday, Irodov, S.L. Loney, like from maths, science, physics, maths, physics, chemistry, everything was there. But it was really ultimately comes down to your own willpower. And I think the fact that I was in a small town, I think it turned out to be an advantage for me. That is, didn't matter to me if somebody was better or worse. I didn't have anything to lose. Yeah. And I think in the end, it was a very good outcome. And actually, even today, I feel like that's my best achievement in my academic career. Although in another exam, Roorkee, I actually did even better, but it's the entrance examination, right? Yeah. So 94 was a good year. After that, I don't think I've ever achieved that much ever in my life, by the way, academically or professionally. But I'm very proud of what I achieved during that time.
So mine was exactly the opposite. So when I joined IIT, I had no idea what the different departments were, what to take. And I ended up taking computer science because that is what people around me with my ranks took. And I remember asking our advisor at the first meeting, saying, what is different from what IIT teaches and what NIIT teaches? NIIT was another institute that used to teach programming. So that was my level of knowledge about computer science. So we accidentally landed in this field only because of what our ranks were.
I think a lot of us, right? I mean, because we barely learned, I don't know how many of you learned any programming in school or had any exposure to computer science, but it's not anything like the kids nowadays do. I think they get a little bit more exposure. So we had very little knowledge of what computer science was back then. So it was predominantly based on ranks. I guess that's the main thing. And then maybe a little bit of advice here and there.
But that was surprising because even in a small town where the access to IIT coaching was not there, my school actually had a computer lab, and so I was fortunate to even learn. I think I was learning C when I was in like 9th grade or something on my own. There was no school computer science subject or anything. So that was one thing that I think by that time probably there was some proliferation of computer science in schools back then.
A couple of points. For me, I was interested in computer science. That's why I did not enter computer science.
That's right, yeah. Ramesh has a very interesting story. So Ramesh entered in a different major, and then based on, I think, the first year performance, you petitioned to move to computer science. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
I was interested in computer science because in school I was doing some... Out of my own interest, I was doing some side classes in my 11th and 12th. And so I was interested in learning more. I guess at that time I was thinking I'll write assembly language programs because they were teaching me higher level, I don't know, basic and whatever. I'll actually write assembly language programs, right? Yeah. And then, but it turned out that I didn't write as many assembly language programs. But that's the reason I kind of asked my brother to kind of go for computer science, and I kind of came to computer science in IIT.
Nice.
So another thing which I think Praveen points out, which I don't know how much of an influence this would be. First, he brought up an interesting point about small town. If you're from a small town, you might not have as much pressure as if you as much as you would have if you were in these coaching classes in cities. Maybe there's something to be said about that. That might help you, if you're motivated, help you to kind of like, work by yourself? And
No, I actually
That's the same thing here. I mean, I see kids here in Bay Area are under tremendous pressure compared to even Asian kids outside the Bay Area here.
This conversation continued for another hour. A lot of surprising revelations occurred in that second hour. Stay tuned and check back next week for part 2 of this conversation. The episode featuring 6 technologists from India, from IIT Chennai Computer Science batch of 1998. All the music used in episodes of the Immigrant Computer Scientists podcast is royalty-free. All voice recordings were performed with and are reproduced with full consent of narrators and participants. You can find music credits on our website. Join the online discussion about this podcast on all major social media, including Twitter and Facebook, with the handle CSImmigrant and hashtag CSImmigrant. And of course, the episode guide is available at our website, csimmigrant.org. This is the Immigrant Computer Scientists Podcast.